This is Todd Crawford.
And this is Eric Sabinsky, and we are too cool for the comic shop.
So this episode, we're going to be talking about the show Bojack Horseman, starring Will Arnett. And we're going to talk about our general thoughts on the show first, and then we're into the last season, the finale, and I guess just a comprehensive overview of the show and our relationship with it as a whole. So I'll start out by asking, how did you discover the show?
Yeah, I remember, hearing the buzz about it on Netflix before I even had Netflix, and my opinion of the show with very narrow sight was that it seemed like a kind of Family Guy with because I remember the original trailers for season 1 being really focused on the gags and the cutaways. Really interested in the show to kind of watch it, from beginning to end. But then it was my senior year of college where I think I saw promotions for season 4, and then the promotions for season 4 looked much more mature and sophisticated comically to me than I had expected the show to be. So I was like, you know what, maybe I should just watch this show. Stop after I started. So I watched the first 4 seasons all basically within a month or so, and then watched seasons 5 and 6 when they came out.
That's fine. It was a very similar experience to me, but I was, I think, a year ahead of you in college. So for me, senior year was season 2, and then season 3 was going to be released the summer I graduated. So I'd heard the hype about it. I'd heard the reputation, but I really I didn't not have interest in the show. I just didn't really have feelings one way or another. But I don't know what drew me to watch it, to be honest. I think it was just I think I actually saw the scene with the Ghostwriters convention in Bojack's house.
Nice.
It's like the first real moment in the show, where it really it cuts beneath that fatty layer of comedy to get to the heart of it in a way, where Bojack's asking Diane if she thinks he's a good person, and the episode just ends. I think I saw that before I saw the show, and that's what sold me on it.
Okay, yeah, so I feel like we both kind of have very similar stories where it was a more complex show than maybe it was advertised to be early on. And it's funny that we basically both started watching it during our respective senior years of college.
Yeah, what's really funny about watching the show was the first time I watched it, I really didn't drink in college. I had no interest. And then I started to experiment with drinking, not even in not like a party phase or anything, but I'd have a glass or 2 of wine a night, which for me in total sobriety, and I was really eating 1,000 calories a day at that point in time. I was really trying to cut back on weight. So it was just totally knocking me out. So I remember watching Bojack Horseman the first time and enjoying it, appreciating it. And then I watched it the second time sober when I was showing it to someone else. We just watched through the whole first 3 seasons together shortly after the 3rd season came out. And there were so many more jokes and little plot lines that I hadn't really appreciated because I was trying to get in Bojack's mind, I guess, or whatever, by drinking. And it's not a show to watch.
That's what Bojack would do.
What?
That's what Bojack would do if he was watching himself. I feel like he would drink to get inside the character.
Yeah. And so that was kind of a funny thing to go back and watch. Wow, there's a lot more background gags than I remember. There's a lot of gags with little things written on posters or in magazine articles you could pause and then read. The animation style is funny because it's kind of made fun of or mocked to be Flash animation-esque. And I see that. I think that even put me off a little bit at first. But it's actually very intricate, the amount of detail put into it, despite that kind of crude first impression that one might have of it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I feel like as the show went on, the art style basically stayed the same, but I feel like the animation kept stepping it up in terms of the creative things that they did with, illustrating Bojack's inner headspace and just doing all these creative gags. They really did that more and more as the show progressed, I feel like.
It did, and I will say, as a showrunner, I do think it got a little repetitious with some of those ideas, but they always had a hook. It was always pretty much done well. I think they always they knew how to use a good gimmick, and I don't use that as a slight against it. I'm approving of the gimmick method, and BoJack really is a show almost built around gimmick episodes in many ways.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost like each character has a couple gimmicks all their own that sometimes, allow them to get their own focused episodes. And kind of going into the final season, I think we saw a lot of that too, either comedically or emotionally. Characters in the final season, which was nice to see that this was a show that was really high quality, all around, I think, and knew when to end as well.
Yeah. Do you just want to go through it season by season? We'll do a quick take on each one because it's a pretty dynamic show in that way.
And I think you and I have favorite seasons and different memories with certain episodes. So I think we should dive into that.
Yeah, so the first season, I mean, it's kind of infamous. A lot of people say it's the worst, and I definitely understand why. It's definitely the first few episodes. I enjoy BoJack Hates the Troops is one that a lot of fans do appreciate, but it definitely...
That one is the first episode, and I think it's the second episode in the whole show, but I think I remember a few times in that episode, and I think that's when I knew I was like, I'm definitely at least finishing this season.
Yeah, in the first season, it's got clever jokes. I mean, it is above average, but it does... The cutaway gags for me mostly didn't work in the first season, and they are laid on a little thick, I think. Even now that I love the show and appreciate where it went, it still definitely had to refine its humor that first year.
I agree. I mean, I think I would probably agree with the sentiment that it's the worst of the 6 seasons. I mean, like you said, it's still above average adult cartoon material, but I think it's probably the worst. Which, hey, if a TV show, if its worst season is the first season, I usually say that as a compliment, because ideally you want your worst season to be the first season. In a way, you want to keep getting better.
Exactly, and I don't personally feel that way. I dislike another season. There's one season I actually don't enjoy at all. But the first season for me is definitely the weaker one. Generally speaking, I mean, the animation, the storytelling, the jokes, and that's perfectly fine because I do still enjoy it. But by the end of the first season, I liked it, but I wasn't sure if I was totally sold on it yet.
It definitely felt a connection to it, that I had never felt with shows like Family Guy or King of the Hill or South Park or anything else like that. So on that merit alone, the whole BoJack's trying to look good for his memoir plot, and Diane's obviously trying to get to the truth of really who he is. Really good initial arc for the show to have. And I was pretty invested in how that, ended up turning out. So having that really be the driving force throughout the first season, I think, made me stick around story-wise.
That's a good point. I do think it's a strong arc for the first season. I do like that plot a lot. I really like BoJack and Diane's dynamic in that first season. I think that's immediately fun. I think the Mr. Peanut Butter element's fun. I think for me, and this was actually there's that moment that I told you about that led me into the show, but that moment, and actually the season finale where it ends and it has the song Wild Horses by Rolling Stones, especially because I had just bought that album probably a month before I watched the show. Was
That's
a really
funny.
nice touch, and I love that little joke.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Will Arnett and Alison Brie are just perfectly casted as their characters, and I think I was really attached to both of their characters in the first season. Other mainstay characters like Princess Carolyn and Mr. Peanut Butter and Todd, liked them a whole lot in the first season, but I really learned and grew to love them as the other seasons went on, because I think as the show progressed, I think they really focused on more than just those two characters and kind of expanded the main characters to 5 as the show continued to go onward.
I definitely agree. Like, actually, Mr. Peanut Butter is my favorite character. And in the first season, I mean, he's there, but he's basically just a foil to Bojack. He's fun, but he is essentially a plot device. Todd as well. I think they never knew what to do with that character. I don't think they ever found out what to do with that character, even once the show was ended. But they're serviceable.
They at least, to different levels of execution, those two characters did get arcs later on. Kind of. Todd is kind of a weird character, but yeah, like Mr. Peanut Butter, I really love him in some of the later seasons. But yeah, in the first season, like you said, he's a foil, but he's like a comedic foil. It's not like he's a Romeo and Juliet kind of foil where it's crucial to the plot. It's kind of like he's there. That's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I do love the stuff where he likes Bojack, and he, is always.
I love that never stopped happening too. I love until the very end of the show, like he's still, thinking that they're friends.
We could get into some of that later, a little more in depth, but that first season, especially with Bojack, like being attracted to Diane, and I have to say, this is a pretty big factor for me. Is I watched this show a few months after Californication with Dave Duchovny, and the show at this point for me still felt very much like just an animated Californication. It was different in some ways. I mean, definitely, it definitely grows into its own and becomes a very unique show. But I think it was still trying to. I think it had a solid idea with the fake out, pull the rug out from under you beginning. The first few episodes being much more comedic in a straightforward way. But I think it definitely had to grow on its own, and by the end of the first season, I think it did pretty well.
I think so, and it's almost like a lesser show would have stopped trying to be serious with that season 1 arc. But as we'll discuss, like they obviously go way, way deeper than perhaps people would have thought they ever would back in 2014. I think was when the show came out originally.
Yeah, and that is the thing. A lot of times the characters get flanderized. They get, like you said, more comedic. And that's what Californication did. I mean, the first few seasons were a very dark comedy. And then later on, it's just like, it's borderline cartoonish. I always say the 5th to 7th season are just DLC. Basically, just pretend they don't exist if you want, or it's bonus content. But Bojack does the exact opposite. And it's really exciting to see that get developed, and hopefully that will be a continuing trend within storytelling in long form.
Yeah, so I guess we can go into season 2 now. And is season 2 your favorite season, if I recall correctly?
It's tough. That was the one that made me love the show. That was the one that really sold it on me. I've seen that one the most. It's got a lot of my favorite stuff. I've got a weird opinion that'll probably be kind of. I'll say it later on once we get to that season. That may be my favorite, tied with it. But at the very least, depending on the day of the week, season 2 is my favorite.
Yeah, when there was only 4 seasons of the show, I definitely remember you saying that at one point. So.
Oh, definitely at that point, yeah.
Yeah, so just tell me about things that season 2 does for you.
It's funny because this was the one where it really got the traction, or it got the hype. And probably what led me to watch it was when I heard like season 2 was getting just so much praise, and it was this mature dark comedy. And when I first started, I was like, this is kind of like season 1, to be honest. It's not that much different. And as it goes on, it just gets more mature. It gets a little bit darker. I think one of the episodes that really sold me on it was I love this episode, and they do this later on in other seasons very well also. But the one with Todd smuggling the chicken lady, and it has all these puns based around like the chicken going like baga, and the chicken's getting interrogated, and the questions are like, who's your favorite composer, Bach, and stuff like that. I really adore that gag.
Yeah, I remember that actually really well now, and I remember Todd creating a horribly not okay in amusement park as like the first Todd, like insane Todd thing that sticks out in my mind, because in season 1 he was just kind of making bad jokes, but in season 2 I feel like is when they started to just go balls to the wall with how ridiculous his character is.
Yeah, that's true. And one thing I really like was that I liked in season 1, I liked how he was a bum. I liked how he was just like a guy living on the couch. He was a loser. But they really definitely did find Todd's voice, as well as Mr. Peanut Butter's. That's when I was sold on this character with the episode. Speaking of which, I think this was the start of PB Livin', as I recall, which is one of my favorite ongoing gags throughout the series.
Yeah. Oh my god, I just remembered another episode that's in season 2. Mr. Peanut Butter's game show, I think, is one of the episodes that had me like cry laughing the most in like the whole show's runtime.
Definitely that whole what is it? Celebrities and famous people. What do they know? I don't know. Let's find out. Or whatever the show's called.
Something exactly like that. And Daniel Radcliffe is in the show, and he keeps winning, and to Bojack's dismay.
And another thing,
remember the context of why Bojack is in the game show, because it's been a while, but I remember really enjoying that episode.
I really enjoyed that one. I really, that's when Mr. Peanut Butter sold for me, was when he confronts Bojack and he's like, "I'm not an idiot. I talked to my wife. I know what's going on." And I think that really defined the character, how he's not one-dimensional. He has his own inner narrative and struggles, but he approaches it differently in a way that's internalized rather than externalized, like Bojack.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with the overall Bojack story too, this has kind of got a little more serious with it, with him being the lead in Secretariat, only to be cut out with CGI in the final episode of the season.
I really liked that gag. I really loved the episode with Herb's death, and somebody steals his book, and the final reveal is that his book's actually awful, and they stole it to save his reputation.
Right.
And of course, we can't discuss season 2 without... Actually, I want to say real quick, I was going to give a shout out to Wanda and Vincent Adult. Man, they are two of my favorite side characters in the whole show.
I was kind of sad that Wanda never really came back, to be honest, because I thought Lisa Kudrow just did such a great job with her character, and she's just such a funny premise of a character to have woken up from a 30-year coma, I think, to not know who Bojack is whatsoever, and also to not understand technology from the past 30 years.
That stuff was great. And I also liked that she was kind of Bojack's anchor in the season for a lot of it. I love her final line where she says that when you're looking at someone through rose-tinted glasses, red flags just look like flags. That's one of the show's best quotes, I think.
Yeah. Quote, and it really continues to apply to a lot of character relationships throughout the whole show, actually.
I liked that Diane hits rock bottom in the show, essentially. I like that she goes to Gordovia and it's preposterous, her saving the children, and she can't cut it, so she comes back and has this existential crisis.
First of many.
Yeah.
I honestly, I feel like Wanda was like another character in the show that is in another season or two, where it's like, God, I wish they would have stayed together. At least it would have been good for Bojack. Not sure if it would have been good for Wanda, but
yeah, I always want her to have a comeback, and she does get a shout out in the final episode, which I appreciated. Vincent Adult, man, though, like, he should have been at the wedding at the end of the show or something. He was one of my favorite jokes. I thought it was so, the business factory and all that. I quote that all the time.
He should have been at the wedding. Oh my God, if Princess Carolyn would have been the only one to be in on it, even at the very final episode, that would have been awesome.
It can be asked, like Bojack could say, just like long time no see or something. And one of the kids could have said, making lots of jobs at the business factory, been busy.
Oh my God. It's just that Bojack can often be very kind of like highbrow sarcastic at times, but it can also be so blatantly like 5-year-old humor stupid, and it commits to it just the same.
It's a really good blend of wit and absurdism. Like, even the animation style and having, like, it reminded me a lot of Zootopia at first when I started watching the show. All these gags of, like, the reporters being birds, and they've got either perched up on an electrical wire and they got their cameras, and just really clever stuff like that. All the celebrity animal name puns, but then you also have like George Clooners.
Yeah, they do a lot with animal humor in this show, which is very much appreciated because I feel like, without the extra mile to go into the nitty gritty of the comedy of that concept, it could have just been like a cute way to make people watch the show more because, like, oh, look, we have animal characters.
Yeah, and I think it's not quite a gimmick. I mean, it's definitely a part of the show's DNA, and it's something that kept me watching even in the the shakier first season. A lot of those animal puns I think did stick. They did work, and I think that really grew and developed and became more complex network of puns and gags and alliteration that really came to define the show's language.
Absolutely, yeah, and that is a language that stuck around until the final season. They were still making animal humor in the final season.
One thing I want to point out before I forget is that the reason that they have the actress for Princess Karen always do all these alliteration jokes is because she hates doing them. The voice actress does. So they purposely write her in this convoluted.
No, that's amazing. Those always kill me, though, too, because they're so good.
It's impressive. I don't know how she could say them, even.
The Princess Carolyn is just so confident when she says them. It's really what sells the comedy of it, too.
It's true. It's very much like, it's very similar to me to Marge Simpson, actually. And how they do, like, you listen to a Simpsons audio commentary, they talk about writing lines for Marge, and they would just, like, come up with things and say it in her voice. And the whole joke is that it's this character saying this phrase. And it just works.
Yeah, they kind of did that, but instead of the voice thing, just kind of preyed on the actress's fear of doing them. I can respect that.
So before we wrap up season 2, we have to talk about New Mexico, which I think at that point in the show, that was probably the show's best episode, I would say. Beginning the trend, maybe not beginning, I guess season 1 probably had 2, of episode 11 being the darkest in each season, and really coming to define the show through the end of the show. I mean, this was the defining moment, I would say, for Bojack as a character.
Absolutely, because this was the episode where he went back to visit his old girlfriend, and then the whole thing with Penny happened, right?
Yeah.
I remember watching that episode, and it was like late at night in my room, and I was alone, and by the end of it, I just felt so. It was like, oh my God, this show took that kind of risk with its main character and just putting you in like this situation is so perfect to make you feel bad in like multiple different ways, because it doesn't like, and that's why it just makes you feel so dirty, but so like ambiguous of what would have happened at the same time. I hate it.
Yeah, and what I love about that episode, especially when I rewatched it, was that it really works in seducing you and charming you at first, with Bojack living with the family, and it's very pleasant. This interaction with the dad particularly is a very fun character. I think he's kind of a guy who tries to always tell jokes and be funny, but he's not. And then Bojack takes the girl out to the prom, and you think it's him kind of being selfish, because I think she gets stood up or something like that, Penny does, and he's out hanging out with her friends, and he does the Bojack dance, and then they go out and they drink a little bit, and it's like, it's a little shaky, but it's still kind of like presented in a way that seems harmless and fun. And they put the lanterns up in the sky, but then they drop the girl off at the hospital, and then something's really fucked up.
Yeah, this episode does a horribly cruel job of like fixing together, imagery and like that lightheartedness that makes you feel safe, and then the sketchy stuff starts happening. And I can only imagine that's what it feels like to actually be in a situation like that. So they really disarm the audience only to make them feel intensely uncomfortable at the end.
Yeah, and I mean, just transition from season 2 to season 3. What's interesting to me is something I've noticed talking with a lot of people now the show's over, and there's kind of two camps. One that thinks season 3 and season 4 is the peak of the show, and the other camp that thinks that it's actually the low point of the show, and that they're really in between. They're almost filler seasons in some ways. You could see it as when you look at like hard plot point turns. And I think that a lot of season 3 is like you're kind of shell shocked after season 2. And, with the Secretariat movie, with Penny, with all these different factors, it's really just like letting things simmer after those big revelations.
Yeah, I kind of feel that. And sometimes I do that. I think they do that in season 3 to great success. I feel like the fish out of water episode where there's no spoken dialogue and they're underwater the entire time. Like such a clear sense of imagery for all the things that's going on inside Bojack's head, but it actually is kind of a redemption episode in a way, as he's taking care of the seahorse. Liking that episode perhaps the most out of the whole season.
I think that's fair. I think it's a lot of people's favorite. It's probably mine off the top of my head. I really enjoyed that episode. I think that was once again where the show it really matured a lot. And it matured. One thing to bring up with that episode is that it's melancholy in points, but it's not just, people think that it's like sad porn. The show is just straight depressing. And I really think that's false advertising. I don't think the show's ever just straight misery. It's always hopeful. It always shows that self-hatred, self-martyrdom is not a healthy way to react. I think it's showing these things, examining them, but also showing how to deal with it and how not to deal with it through the various characters. And what I love about that episode is the wide range of emotions it goes through. Regret, caring, affection for this person, wanting to communicate, not being able to, feeling alone, but yet it does so without ever really. It's not a tearjerker. It's just a very poignant, emotional episode, while also being conveyed, like you said, almost purely visually in a way that really you only see in high-end films, let alone a Netflix animated Flash series.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think the animation, this show just being animated helps express that more too. And the creator, once the final season ended, basically talked about that and like how handling a lot of these more depressing subjects feels more accessible in animation and in kind of this furry archetype that it's kind of built for itself. And show is really brilliant because I don't know of many other shows that have just latched on to such a difficult subject matter and actually using the medium it's being told in as like a more accessible means to tell difficult stories.
Yeah, I mean, I could think of examples. The one that comes to mind immediately would be The Sopranos, which the Funhouse episode, the season 2 finale, or the Kevin Finnerty plotline in which Tony's in a coma and he imagines he is another man with another identity. And there's a really horrifying sequence. You could watch it without having seen the show. It's very Lynchian, where he's outside this party, and his cousin, played by Steve Buscemi, is saying everybody's waiting for me. Let me take your bag. The bag being his baggage, his connection to the real world life. And all of a sudden, Tony starts getting scared, and he hears his mother in there. He hears family members, and Steve Buscemi's pressuring him, getting more aggressive, saying everybody's waiting for you. Come on. Everybody wants you to come inside. And I think stuff like that definitely hits that level of depression, mental illness, and all that. But with that said, and it is an influence. I mean, that's, I would say, probably undeniable, especially just certain key points in Sopranos. But, is it really an insult to compare Bojack Horseman to The Sopranos?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely going for different things. I feel like Bojack's a little funnier.
The Sopranos is one of the funniest shows ever made, I think. I'm not joking. I mean, it's brilliantly written comedy. It was supposed to be a comedy originally, and they definitely toned that down a little bit. But quotable jokes and all that, it's a very funny show.
And I feel like you say that season 3 is filler because I actually just refreshed myself and realized that, oh yeah, this is the season where Sarah Lynn actually dies at the end.
Yeah.
And things that basically the reporters are trying to sting Bojack for at the second half of season 6. So it's really his most major mistakes seem to be happening in seasons 2 and 3.
It's true. And you know, the thing with me, unfortunately, I always try to watch a show as soon as I can, but I got a spoiler on that season with Sarah Lynn, which I kind of figured would happen anyways. I mean, it's hinted at and joked about in the first season when she first appears. She mentions overdosing on heroin at some point, inevitably. And I knew it was coming, but I do wonder, like, I kind of wish she was around a little bit longer in the show, just because I enjoy that character. I love the voice actress, Kristen Shaw. She's great on Gravity Falls. She's in a lot of stuff as a voice actress, and I really enjoy her. So I wish she could have been on the show more. But I also understand why they had to give that big moment at the end of that season as well.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. So so season 3 is not the season you dislike or anything, right?
No, I actually enjoy season 3 a lot. I think season 3 keeps the momentum of season 2. I think the writing quality keeps up. I think the character dynamics are just getting better. I really love I love the Todd plot line. I want to bring up because I don't typically like the Todd arcs. I think season 3 is very good. I love how it shows asexuality, how he's with this girl, and he doesn't want her in that way, and that causes friction. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't know how to communicate it. I think it's actually very well done. I love how Bojack becomes a wedge in that.
I mean, it was kind of a shocking moment when I was like, oh wait, they're giving Todd like something to actually deal with. I was actually kind of surprised.
And he gets the big F-bomb of the season.
Yeah, pretty much. And they, for better or worse, I feel like his gets neglected compared to the other characters later on at certain points, but they do stick with it. In that part of his character the entire rest of the show. So I'm glad that they stuck with it and didn't just like make it a one-off, season finale like shock and then just like threw it away.
I'm a little conflicted on it because I feel like it was never taken further really or done anything better with it after season 3. Oh, I want to bring out the improv group. Was that season 2 or season 3?
I don't remember.
It's been so. I think it was season 2. I'm pretty sure, honestly. But that just came to mind. That was funny. I love that Bojack and Princess Carolyn. They really hint that they're going to end up having a baby because of the seahorse episode and their episode in the restaurant where they kind of like talk about their past relationship. I really love that stuff. Princess Carolyn really gets a lot more meat this season, which I appreciate.
Absolutely. I keep going back and forth, and I honestly, by the end of the show, I felt like Princess Carolyn was my favorite character, to be honest.
That's a pretty common statement I hear, and I totally get that. She is definitely probably the best person in the show. Just looking at it in reality.
That's actually hard to argue because I guess Diane would be the only other person who you could maybe make an argument for, and even Diane is kind of more obviously selfish, I guess, even when she's trying to be altruistic in a way, because Diane's kind of crazy in that way.
Yeah, and that's one thing I love about Diane that I think wavers, especially seasons 1 and 2. I think it's really, really well done and tasteful how she has these huge notions about social justice and equality and journalistic integrity, but she as a person can't keep her own life together and can't act righteously herself, and I really think that's done tastefully the first few seasons. And I think at points Diane almost is the worst character on the show. Like season 2, I think she's really kind of a bum.
I don't even really remember what she does in season 2, to be completely honest.
She just crashes at Bojack's house and drinks.
Oh yeah, well I guess that makes sense. No, she definitely gets a lot to do in the second half of the show, I feel like. But yeah, in the middle of the show, I don't know if they really knew what to do with her, to be honest.
Yeah, I definitely started to feel that way. Starting probably in season 3, honestly. Her relationship with Mr. Peanut Butter, I felt like wasn't always done well. It was kind of back and forth. They had moments that were nice and cute where it made sense, but I feel like they really teased us too much with the will they won't they get divorced thing. I like the abortion plot for the most part in this season. I think some of the jokes, some of the commentary is a little heavy-handed, but I liked her moment with Princess Carolyn, where Princess Carolyn, she goes to explain herself, and Princess Carolyn says, you don't need to explain. I love the joke with Mr. Peanut Butter where it's a balloon he's holding, and it says it's a boy, but OY is crossed out, and it said it's aborted.
Oh my god, I remember that now.
And I love how it shows the inevitability that their relationship will collapse, that they're not committed to each other. I enjoy that episode a lot.
I think that ties into season 4 really well, if we want to move on to that, because that's when I felt like that the two of them as characters really started getting tested as a unit. And, by the end of season 4, I believe is when they decide to split up. And, because, they both cared about each other, even if they were not really compatible. So season 4, I think, did a really good job with Mr. Peanut Butter's whole ridiculous running for governor arc, and that a wedge between them dramatically, but it also provided a lot of comedy, too.
Yeah, and this is the first of my 2 black sheep opinions on the show. I almost dropped it at season 4.
It is really surprising because I think when I watched season 4, like I said, I watched because of advertising for season 4, and I watched basically the first 4 seasons in September of 2017 because that's when season 4 came out. And honestly, after I watched season 4, I thought that was my favorite season so far.
It seems to be, and I have most, of course, anecdotal evidence. Critically, it was still getting very high reviews. I don't think it ever dipped critically to this day. But I knew if a lot of fans didn't like it when it came out, that it kind of went nowhere. And I knew some were very passionate, particularly about episodes like Time's Arrow. How I felt is that I thought it reduced all the characters to 1 or 2 notes. I thought it lost the complexity that it previously had. I thought it was a complete artistic failure, which is not something even most people who don't care for the season go so far as to say. But I think the whole season's constructed around this conceit that, Bojack's mother, who I never cared for the stuff with his mother, to be honest. I thought it was too over-the-top abusive parent in the flashbacks, even in season 2, with her. But they wanted to de-villainize her character, so to speak, and show her to be more human. But they do that by creating an even more evil character, which was her father. And the whole season of me just really felt just shallow, actually.
I can kind of see where you're coming from. It's kind of, I would say it's definitely the most soap opera season of the show. Because of that family backstory stuff. I also just felt like the show was trying really hard to kind of get at the core of what Bojack Horseman is about. If you were to choose, there's a lot of themes that you can apply to the show, but one of the most prevalent is that, these people are shitty because things to them. And I didn't care a lot about his mom and the flashbacks and stuff like that. But what I did keep thinking about was how all of these things that happened to prior generations ended up affecting Bojack as a child in a negative way. And so that's really where mine was at during a lot of those, sequences in the beginning and the end of the season.
One
it explains my mindset.
One thing I will say positive with the season, the one episode I did enjoy, which is probably the only episode I enjoyed at all, really, was actually the old Sugarman House episode. It wasn't perfect, but I really liked the way that it interwove Bojack's story with his mother's. I thought the mother stuff was very, very heavy-handed. but the animation was still well done. I still think it had a really good joke or two in there.
Hey, and I really liked the parallelism that they were drawing with like the Firefly old man character.
Yeah, I enjoyed that too.
It's almost like he was Bojack's cranky conscience in a way, but he kind of went away quickly. But for the time that he was there, I remember him having an impact on me as his character. Yeah, I'm scrolling through the other season 4 episodes. Kind of see where you're coming from. It's like stuff is either really heavy-handed with Bojack, or it's really kind of crazy without much plot, like the Mr. Peanut Butter stuff and the Todd stuff.
Yeah, and what I found it to be a very reductionist season in that they break it down character by character. I'm going to say I don't care for Hollyhock being in it as much as she is. I do actually like the character as she's shown later in the show. And where that character goes, I think is one of the most effective moments in the series. But in that season, being in it as much as she was, she's not a funny character. She's not really a compelling character in any way. She's just a teenager, and that's fine. But given as much screen time as she's given, I don't feel it's warranted. I don't think she's a good addition to the show in that capacity. I'm happy that she's in the show later, but I'm happy that she's not in much of the show later. And I can get into that with a season 6 discussion.
The thing with every other horse character in this show, especially this season, is that they're included to help build Bojack's story. End of this season, Bojack is actually trying to take some ownership for shit for once, and that was a pretty cathartic moment. As to find who Hollyhock's parents really are, because for such a long time he thinks that he's a father, which would have been if that would have been true, that would have been a pretty horrible end, especially considering how you already don't like the over-the-top ham-fistedness of the season.
Yeah, and I like where they go with that. Overall, Bojack's plot in the show, I like. I don't love the Hollyhock stuff, but Bojack, more his character goes by in this season, I liked Bojack more than I ever did. Mr. Peanut Butter, for instance, this was a common thing with comedy at that point in time. It was election season. It was all about Trump. I think Mr. Peanut Butter is a funny character. I don't think Mr. Peanut Butter Trump is an effective satire. I don't think it's clever. And I don't think it's really funny or endearing in the way that I cared about this character. Beyond politics, I'm not a Trump guy. There's some funny Trump comedies out there. But I felt like this one was shoehorned in to such an extent. Like for instance... Oh, I'm sorry.
I remember resonating a lot with the political humor, because obviously you see where it's coming a mile away. It was 2017. It was the year after Trump got elected, for Christ's sakes. But the thing there was like one episode that I remember laughing a lot, and I think it's when they do so much fracking that the entire their entire house like falls underground or whatever. When it committed to being over the top like that, I feel like it gave the humor a little more creativity to breathe. But I hear where you're coming from on that too.
And one particular episode was the gun episode, and I think Bojack's always been politically heavy-handed. I don't mind. Some episodes they do something I may not see eye to eye with in a way that I think, wow, that's actually really a good way to look at it. I see that, even though I may not agree. Other episodes I agree, and I think, man, I'm on your side, but I do not see where you're coming from here. And one episode in this season I think is particularly shameful is the gun episode. And first of all, structurally, Mr. Peanut Butter running for mayor is ridiculous, but it makes sense in Hollywood. Arnold Schwarzenegger and etc. I like Diane doing a BuzzFeed kind of thing against him. I think that's a clever thing structurally. I just think the execution is flawed. But the gun episode, the whole thing's constructed around Diane liking guns, and eventually they're taken away because women like guns. And the only thing that America loves more than guns is hating women or something like that, is ultimate punchline.
Yeah, I do remember that episode now.
In the absurdism of that and stuff, I can kind of deal with in that way, but it's like, it tries to be an actual satire. It deals a lot with like guns in movies, causing violence and stuff like that, and I don't agree with that at all. I don't think it's done in a tasteful way or funny. But then like, the whole argument that most gun nuts have is that it evens the playing field so women can protect themselves. Like, a lot of the satire in that way to me just felt so unthought out. Like fracking.
Yeah.
The big thing was, it's a fun word to say, and it's like, that could be a joke you say once, but like, if that's the crux of your political argument, like, listen, like, Bojack's a funny, clever show. It's a good show with character stuff, but when it really thought that it could be, you know, it's like Parks and Rec, actually. Parks and Rec's a show that's really funny. It's got a great cast. It has great emotional beats. But when it wants to be a political satire, it's so one-sided, it's so over the top, that it just fails in doing anything other than presenting a straw man.
Yeah. No, I kind of agree with you there. And I think part of the reason why the things you're talking about didn't bother me as much is, like, I've only seen the 4th season once. I've never rewatched the show. I've only watched it once. And I feel like if I went back and revisited season 4, I think a lot of these things would bother me more now that we're talking about it.
Yeah, it just feels horribly dated. And the show always was. I mean, they did the Harvey Weinstein thing before that came out with, he was, Bill Cosby caricature makeup in season 2. And they usually do that pretty well, I think, actually. A lot of the political stuff I do agree with, and I do appreciate how they communicate it. But that one to me felt like it was almost just rushed to be timely in a way that wasn't properly formulated or thought out, especially for a show that is so thoughtful.
Yeah. No, I can hear you. Well, luckily, season 4 leads into season 5, which I believe is your second, maybe some other days of the week, your first favorite season of the show.
Yeah, and it's so funny because that's the one that most people I know that love season 3 and season 4 do not like. That's my other black sheep opinion. I adore season 5. It like totally got me back in the show enthusiastically.
Yeah, I think season 5 they really started to give characters dedicated episodes too. I remember watching season 5 and its beginning episodes and feeling like punched in the gut with like each of the first 3 or 4 episodes, because, you know, Bojack, you know, you think he has this like moral victory at the end of season 4, but then, you know, he's not doing too well. Or you can see the shadows looming over him and where this is going to lead. Diana's obviously not doing too well because her and Mr. Peanut Butter had split and is in Vietnam trying to like understand how to write again and how to live again.
I'm sorry.
Had
the episode with Diane in Vietnam, I really appreciate and adore that episode, because at that point I really wasn't in Diane as a character anymore. I really just thought that she had been exhausted as a concept, and her splitting peanut butter is just like, where do you go from here? What are you gonna do? Are her and Bojack gonna hook up? Is that where you're going with this? Are they just gonna degenerate further? And it was really, you know, the show once again takes a lot of influence from Lost in Translation. But that episode, how it presents her not relating to this culture that she thought she might, how she's kind of a fraud in many ways, but you still empathize with her, you still root for her, I think is just absolutely brilliant.
I agree, and it really gets to, you know, how Diane is relatable, because I think a lot of us try to be the best versions of ourselves, but like perhaps overcomplicate it, or in our quest to overcomplicate things, we actually make more mistakes, and then our flaws, you know, come out more, you know, than maybe if we didn't try so hard, and I can relate to that, and I that's Diane started to be that character again in season 5.
Yeah, I think they really found direction with the show at this point, and I don't think they knew the show was going to end, but I think they knew that they were on their last legs at this point. I really feel like there's a sense of momentum where, like I said, season 3 and 4, they move forward. They definitely do. Don't get me wrong. But I think they stagnate more than any other season. And I think in season 5, it felt
Yep.
like they really just like were running towards the finish line.
Feel like, yeah, the middle seasons, like their finales are big and important, but maybe they don't progress as much with like the character arcs like in the middle of their respective seasons.
With Todd, I really liked the asexuality thing in season 3. In season 4, I thought it defined his character too much and became the center of his being. So when you have that episode with him in the asexual household, or the very sexual household with his asexual girlfriend, I thought was really funny and clever. And then getting him out of that and putting him in a position where he's now running a company, I thought was a really fun and a fish out of water way.
Yeah, no, I think I laughed the most at work compared to any of the other ones he had throughout the show.
I definitely did, and I loved his sex bot. It was such juvenile humor, but it cracked me up every single time.
It did. They kept really taking things out of context with what it was saying, and every other character was somehow oblivious to its sexual pervertedness, and it somehow ended up becoming the CEO of the website.
And what I love is when it needs plugged in and it's saying things that aren't sexual, they interpret it as sexual harassment.
I feel like that was a clever way to talk about sexual harassment than like stuff the show had done previously.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I've talked with a few people where like the whole thing you think is going to build up this huge Me Too kind of statement, but ultimately, at least that particular plot, you could have the Bojack stuff, which definitely does go that way, but that particular plot is just ultimately a farce, and I love that. I think that's so funny.
Yeah, I hear you. I think the season character got a good amount of time to shine in this season. Princess Carolyn is really trying to do something in her life that gives her that increased sense of meaning, if that even exists. I don't even know if she feels like that would exist, but she keeps on trying, especially with the baby plot. And learning a little bit about her backstory was interesting, because I was under the impression that the show really only cared about Bojack's backstory, like as a family kind of construct, and then they did hers for an episode.
Yeah, they do little ones. I think season 3, I really love this episode in season 3 with Mr. Peanut Butter's brother, and they mentioned season 5 just casually about his family. Not really casually, just a little bit of a plot point with his family going on the farm. Dying.
So before I forget, I know he's gone out of the show by season 5, but I need to mention Ralph. I kept wanting Ralph to appear again because I like him, and I thought he and Princess Carolyn were good together, but apparently the show didn't think so, and I was a little sad.
Yeah, I love Ralph. I hate how he's written out in season 4. I thought that the weird racist cat mouse thing was just a little bit... I don't know, it just didn't feel right for Ralph. I was fine with the plot if it was a different character, but I thought...
No. He just kind of goes because she tells him to go, and I didn't really view him as that spineless of a character. I don't know. It felt...
Yeah. Even in season 5, he comes back for that one episode with the baby, and ultimately how she's like, you know what, I don't need you, I'm going to do this on my own. I do appreciate that. I do think that character deserved a better dismissal in some capacity, but at least he kind of came back for a little more.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, they didn't really have to stay together, because I like what Carolyn ends up going through in the final season, but yeah, I feel like they could have sent him off better. Like, I feel like Wanda kind of got a send-off as like the season 2 unique character, but Ralph just kind of like wavered and meandered off the show.
Yeah, and he was he's such a positive force in Carolyn's life, especially after that rabbit guy, I forget his name, who I enjoyed that stuff too with the movie
Mr.
speech.
Rabatowitz, I think.
Yeah.
An asshole. He's cute though, but he's an asshole.
Yeah, he was a fun antagonist character in season 2, but I just I don't know. I feel like Ralph deserved a little more attention, but it's one of those shows. People come and go in it. I guess I understand that.
Yes.
One thing
he was just a good boy. And highlights for me was the eulogy episode, because even if you don't care about Bojack's mom, the fact that they were able to fucking string out a minute episode of Bojack just shooting the shit was impressive.
That's one of my favorite episodes. Definitely like top 4 or 5 for me. I adored the episode. I think Will Arnett's voice acting is great in it. The monologue is great. The thing with me and Bojack's mom is I'm okay with the effect it has on him. The flashbacks of her like putting a cigarette on him as a kid or whatever, it's just a little too much, even for as dark as the show gets and as cartoonish as the show gets. But that particular episode I really love, and the final gag in the episode where he goes to look at his mother and he opens a casket and he's at the wrong funeral, I think is one of the funniest jokes in the whole show.
Yeah, that's a joke that really speaks to Bojack's character very well.
Yeah, I think I was actually like crying from laughing so hard and like telling people about it who don't watch the show the night I watched that.
It just has so much payoff. Like I was laughing, but I almost kind of felt bad. I was like, oh my fucking god, all of that like pouring his heart out and all of his thoughts was worthless.
It's great. It was one of those moments that I'll never forget for seeing it and just like think like I can't believe they thought of that. Just being just dumbfounded.
And that no one in this other funeral had the heart to like tell him like, yo, you're in the wrong room, the wrong time.
Yeah, and it's so great. You see, and it's just like a family full of like salamanders or whatever.
Yeah, and the fact that it didn't occur to Bojack is kind of a mystery.
It's so great. So I love that. The pill popping thing is a big thing fans have issue with. I get that. I have a counter argument. I can't get into too much. I know people who were opioid addicts. I know people who have overdosed on pills. I've done a lot of research for it, particularly for my last book. I've watched dozens of documentaries, news articles. I've read about it, the different drugs. My issue with the painkillers and Bojack all of a sudden being an addict, like people say, it is sudden. It is foreshadowed a little. I get why people don't immediately buy it. But one of the defining characters of like opioid addicts is that people don't recognize it. There's countless stories I've heard of families like at Christmas where they knock on, their son who's visiting from college, knock on his bedroom door, and he's dead in there, and nobody had any idea. His friends and family didn't know. So I can excuse it. I can let that slide.
I mean, I think that's kind of an odd thing to criticize, in my opinion. I never felt that way, and unless you've been through a similar situation, I don't even know if you have the know-how to criticize it, really, because we obviously know Bojack is an addict. He might not have been an addict on opioids or whatever the hell he ends up taking, but he's certainly an alcoholic, like, chronically, and he had a few certain pushes mentally to break him to go towards something else. I didn't really have to suspend any disbelief or anything.
That's how I felt too. And just to wrap up season 5, that episode with I feel bad because I like this character, but his co-star on the show he was filming in season 5, he's having a fantasy and he's just strangling her, is one of the most unsettling moments I've seen in probably any TV show, honestly.
Because I really didn't expect that, because I thought season 2 and 3 was the most uncomfortable I was going to get with the stuff with Penny and Sarah Lynn. But yeah, no, when that happened, I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, that's great. Very awesome. Good job, Bojack.
Yeah, that was, I couldn't believe it. I love him going to rehab at the end and having that moment with Diane. I don't know if you read the fan theories, but there's one episode, Bobo, the angsty zebra, where 2 psychiatrists are discussing their clients who are clearly the show's characters. I love that frame narrative and the jokes they present. But
I do remember that. That was hilarious.
Diane is presented as Princess Diane, who dies in a tunnel in a car, and she ends the season driving into a tunnel in a car. So a lot of people speculated that Diane was going to die in a car crash when Bojack was in rehab at the end of season 5, which I found pretty interesting. I mean, obviously that's not where it went. It was a wild theory to begin with, but it was a lot of fun speculating where the show might go.
Would have been sobering. I'm kind of glad they did not do that.
I would have been interested to see where the show went from that, but I'm glad it didn't happen. I really, really love what they do with Diane in the last season.
I agree. Yeah, without further ado, I guess we can dive into the last season. Really quick, I wanted to mention the Halloween party episode with Mr. Peanut Butter was one of my favorite Mr. Peanut Butter episodes.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I absolutely love Halloween episodes. So that one was a special one for me, especially centered around my favorite character. I forgot about that episode, funny enough, but that was a really good one. That was a lot of fun.
However, they, got into Mr. Peanut Butter's inner voice, but also, played up the Halloween aspect of his exes haunting him throughout a party was amazing.
Oh, another thing I want to bring up real quick. This is a callback to season 2. My favorite episode from season 2 actually is the one where it goes. It has the party that Mr. Peanut Butter throws for Diane, and it goes falsely. Paul McCartney's in this episode with a quick cameo, and then each of the guests leave, and it just follows each of the guests on their way home, or what happens once they get home. And that was one of the episodes for me that just was like, wow, this show is really something special.
When they have a good gimmick or a good gags, they really, they dry it out. They pull it out for the most use. It's like taffy, the best jokes in this show. Like they stretch it out and they continue to make jokes out of it until you just can't anymore.
Speaking of which, the final season, and this is kind of getting into it, a non sequitur, so to speak, of the season, but the surprise wedding party may be my favorite comedic episode in the entire series.
Oh my gosh, yeah. No, yep, because that was the episode where they're all stuck in their house and they can't be seen while they're having basically a dispute about his cheating.
I can't even think of... There's so many amazing visual gags with people hiding behind furniture as they're fighting through the house room to room.
And somehow they just don't see anything for like 20 minutes straight. Yeah, I would say comedically that was potentially my favorite episode of the whole last season, just from a humor standpoint.
Yeah, it might be my favorite gag episode of the whole show. I love the one joke where they're arguing and, he talks about her parents and they're hiding behind the couch and they're kind of like, oh. And then he says, and that one guy at the gas station that paid for your gas, what about him? I don't like him either. And then it shows him. He looks depressed.
He's there for some reason.
In the concept of a surprise wedding is one of the most brilliant, stupid jokes I've ever heard in my life.
No, it's so good. And of course, it would come at the one moment where Mr. Peanut Butter actually decides to have a conscience and to like think hard enough to like maybe do the right thing.
It's just so I'm gonna say this much. I think season 6 I'm gonna split this up into 2 parts if you're okay with that for the sake of discussion.
Yeah, because it was released in 2 parts as well, and it was the only season and 2 have been done that way, so I think that's fair.
I think season 6A is the best the show ever was. I think it was the absolute strongest in almost every single way.
Yeah, I kind of feel that too. I waited. I didn't watch it when it came out because I knew, it would have a cliffhanger and I'd freak out. So I basically waited until mid-January to watch it. And then, 6B came out a couple of weeks later. But I remember just watching those first 8 episodes alone and just adoring the show, probably at its peak as well. Like you said, I really love how it gets such dedicated time to finish up their arcs in this season, or at least the first half of the season.
Yeah, I know there's always that moment in the show where like emotion is just a peak for me. Like I can think of for me like the show 6 Feet Under. I remember I'm rewatching that with one of my roommates now, and there's a scene where Nate Fisher, he's gonna get brain surgery, and he's with his mother. And it's a very strained emotional relationship, and she's like, "Well, are you ready to go?" And he's a grown man who's moved back at home after the death of his father, and he just like starts like full on just like sobbing, and he puts his head in her lap, and he's like, I don't want to go, and she's like stroking his head, and she's like, I won't let them take you, I don't let anything happen to you. And oh my god, it's just gut wrenching. It's so hard to watch. And the show gets infinitely so much more depressing as it goes on. I love that show. It's a very funny show, but it is the most emotional show probably ever. Maybe the saddest fucking thing I've ever seen in a fictional series. But Bojack Horseman for me had that moment where your just stomach just drops. It is the only time the show actually made me cry. Was it's funny 'cause it's a happy moment. Bojack's in rehab and he calls Princess Carolyn, and she says, "Oh, why didn't you mention it to me? I would have come visited you." Or it was for his medal, or where I would have come seen it. And it's such a quiet, just such a simple, perfect bit of writing between these two characters. It just meant so much.
Yeah, I agree. His basically calling and making amends with the other characters is really touching because, you know, deep down, Bojack has always been like this self-loathing character the whole show, you know, just kind of masked with arrogance and alcohol and all this other shit. But the rehab actually works on him to a certain extent, and at the end of that premiere, it was really just that one episode at first. It just feels like there's genuine hope because, like, oh wow, these characters do genuinely care for each other. And I totally feel you. I was feeling the emotions in that premiere really good.
That and oh man, I'm trying to think. This is towards the end of 6A, but when he goes to his hairstylist and he has the gray hair, and then Diane takes the medication and she gains weight. I can't explain it, but like allowing the character to age in the show and show it not as a sign of like, oh, they're getting over, this is sad, but a sign of emotional maturity is one of the most profound, beautiful things I've seen in any work of art, honestly.
Because I don't like a lot of shows wouldn't even ever do that. I mean, especially with a female character, like, yeah, Diane has weight gain, and I don't even think anyone ever mentions it, like, at all.
She mentions being afraid of gaining weight for not taking her medication. That kind of clues you in for the visual reveal, of course, later. But and what I love about those things is that you see, like, she's like quite a bit larger than she was the rest of the series, and she's always kind of sexualized in the series in a certain way, through the other characters, not through the writing. And to see that and basically be so happy for her is really a great achievement on behalf of the writers.
Exactly, because it really comes with the comfort that she is trying to achieve with herself and with her new boyfriend, which I really liked his character a lot. I thought he was very funny, but also very charming.
I did too. I really love the relationship. I like that voice actor. He's in a lot of stuff. I don't remember who he is, but that whole plot, the whole thing with Diane, I just really loved in all of season 6, A and B.
It really showed a maturity of her, and felt like she had actually made some noticeable progress once the series was done, at least for her.
And the other characters aren't getting as much this season. We have, of course, the cheating of peanut butter, as we talked about. Todd's stuff, he kind of gets shafted again, honestly. That was the weakest part of season 6 for me as a whole. I liked his episode with his stepdad, but I thought it was going somewhere when I saw it in season 6A.
Yeah, it was, and I guess it kind of goes somewhere. I guess he makes amends with his mom. It just, there's really no catharsis when it happens because it's kind of wasted on a joke with that recurring actress woman who I can never remember her name.
Margot Martindale, who was in the real film, The Secretariat, actually.
So, I mean, and I usually like her episodes. I thought she was a really funny recurring character, but I didn't feel like she really belonged in the end of Todd's arc, really.
No, and I mean, she did. It kind of mirrors Bojack because she redeems herself because her life went down the path after sabotaging his musical. I kind of appreciate that, but like, so with Bojack, I absolutely love his stuff in season 6A. I love sober Bojack, and watching this season and getting to the end what I prepared myself mentally and emotionally for was Bojack having his hardest struggle looming, and we could talk about the cliffhanger episode real quick. But he has to be sober, and he has to confront these things head on and take responsibility for the first time in his life. Is what I really wanted to see. That's the struggle I was hoping for. And yeah, so that last episode, how did you feel about that when you first watched it?
Like, the first half of the season was building up, a resolution for these characters, almost a happy ending for everybody. And then, well, the reporters are hilarious, and maybe it's because I'm a reporter, but just the way they dug into their 1920s tropes of just talking and talking because they love to hear themselves talk was amazing. So I wanted to praise that because that made me laugh every time they were on screen. But at the end of the day, they're, trying to investigate Sarah Lynn's death, but also eventually the stuff that happened with Penny. And you can see where that's going. And then how Hollyhock reacts really pushed me up. Like, I felt a pit in my stomach. I was like, well, his past is coming to haunt him, and arguably rightfully so, of course. But, it's almost like, damn, he would have, escaped it out a little less, a little more unscathed otherwise. But I was definitely glad that I watched it in January, so I didn't have to wait 3 months.
It was pretty rough. I was so happy for Bojack and all the characters. I was so happy the resolution is building towards. And in that episode, like, at first I was just like, what is this? Why are you wasting screen time that I could be spending these characters I love on these reporters? Why is this a weird thing with Hollyhock going to a party? I don't understand. And then as it built up, what really sells the episode, I like the reporters, actually. I think they are funny. I like that joke too. And but what really sold the episode for me, and I really had to sleep on even after I saw it, was that final discussion with Repeat and Hollyhock, where he's talking to her and he's telling about the party in New Mexico, and like as he tells it, you slowly begin to remember it. And there's that moment where you as a listener are hearing, you're like, oh my god, he's that same kid.
You don't recognize him. At least I didn't, because it's season 2 stuff. I had watched it 2 years ago or more, so I didn't remember that detail. And then he almost just starts describing the scene, like it's fucked up, but you don't realize it's a Bojack thing at first.
And there's like, 2 great final lines in the first, and then the penultimate, and then the final episode of this half season, where right before his reporters, Bojack's in a church, and they're putting on a reenactment of a witch hunt or something like that. And then the priest says, well, I hope you enjoyed the show. Stick around and we'll start it again in 22 minutes or something like that, which is the length of an episode, foreshadowing, of course, that he was going to relapse. And then the end of this one, where Hollyhock asks Repeat, she's like, what was his name? And right before he says it, of course, it cuts away and the theme begins.
Yeah, I thought that was a very effective cliffhanger, which I guess leads into the rest of the season, which is basically dominated by, which I know you and I talked offline about that, and how we're kind of mixed on that because the other characters don't really get to continue their resolutions super well to different extents because it's so focused on Bojack. So before we jump into part 2, I wanted to talk about Princess Carolyn because I think she had my favorite episode, like emotionally, of the first half of the season, because she's so self-conscious about being the best mom she can be, or if it feels right to adopt a kid, and on all these things. And then she ends up having a heart-to-heart with her former work rival, and they realize that the rival didn't ever hate her. And then there's just the end of the episode almost made me cry, because when she's trying to name her child and she doesn't want to name her child because that's commitment at that point, and then she finally names the porcupine baby Ruthie, I was very teary at that point.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite episodes. Definitely emotionally, is probably my favorite of 6A. The whole episode, I love how, I'll never understand as a mother, at least, maybe somebody's a parent, that anxiety of a baby crying all the time. I have nieces and nephews, and I'm around that, and I get that anxiety in little short bursts, but like the way the animation, the way they do the sound design is just so perfect in that episode. I love that so much.
Yeah, no, it was really well done, and I'm glad she basically, I would say, got perhaps the happiest ending, and I feel like she worked hard for it, because I think, like we alluded to earlier in our podcast, that she's probably the most morally righteous character of the main cast, and I feel like she got what she deserved, and I'm very happy about her resolution.
Definitely, same. I mean, one thing I will say is that 6A seems designed to send off all the side characters and give them happy endings. And season 6B seems very deliberately paced out so that you get less and less of them as it progresses, so you can focus more and more on Bojack, ultimately with a big reveal to show you, the audience, how much time that you've spent away from these characters, as well as Bojack having spent away from the characters. I get that. Artistically, I respect it. I may need to rewatch it. I even thought about doing it before we recorded this episode, so I could actually get a more sober opinion on them, rather than just an emotional, cathartic kind of, response.
I know what you mean. I'm generally a fan of the entire sixth season, and I agree with everything you said. It's designed very specifically to distance you from the other characters and to focus on Bojack's impending misery and very poor decisions toward the end of the show. So I think they did it well. There might have been a couple episodes that felt, maybe a little not super important. Maybe we could have got a little more time with some of the side characters. Overall, I guess, about, I don't know, I feel like it was still a bit drawn out in Bojack having to done.
Yeah, and the general plot points I really enjoy too. It's just that as a whole, it wasn't quite as perfect as the show sometimes otherwise is, structurally and emotionally. So I want to praise it, first of all, for the episode with Diane writing her book and wanting this dark, memoir about her upbringing that ultimately wound up being a fluffy YA book. I really love Princess Carolyn's advice to her. I love the animation style. I really appreciated that episode.
And we're aspiring authors, so I think we could probably both relate a bit to Diane's struggles and to want to write something so profound, and she so desperately wants to do that. Like, she so desperately wants to write everything perfect or be the perfect social justice warrior, and then Carolyn's just like, yo, people love this other thing you do. Like, why is that bad? Essentially, is what Carolyn ends up telling her.
Yeah, I think I remember the line specifically. Diane always said that, like, she thought her pain would be justified if she could write this book about her life and make sense of it. And she said, "What if I can't write that?" And then Prince Carolyn says, "I don't know, but you wrote this. You can write this." And I love how she relates to her love interest in the season's son through the book. I really thought that was a clever and funny little interaction they had about it.
Oh, absolutely. Just he was like, "Oh, will these two characters still be friends? Can they forgive each other?" And Diane's like, "Well, yeah, of course they can." So it's like she's still able to reach people on this kind of emotional level, even though it might not be as highbrow as she wanted her writing to be. But in the end, that doesn't really matter.
And it's also kind of related to her, her relation with Bojack and the comedy of the scene is that the teenage son, he's acting too cool for, like, it's a stupid book. Plus, I mean, clearly this character wouldn't have forgiven that character and that kind of deal.
Exactly.
But he's clearly very invested in the story, and yeah, he eventually kind of opens up to her using that. So that episode I really thought was giving the character the attention it deserves, and further developing her relationship, showing her growth. A lot of good stuff there. Mr. Peanut Butter's plot in this season, or 6B season, I did not care much for. It was like a one episode joke that I felt was dragged out for too much of it.
Peanut butter, I guess, just I don't know. His story kind of seemed the least resolved to me, which must infuriate you a little bit.
Honestly, I actually really like where it went ultimately in the last episode, but I liked his girlfriend. A lot of people didn't like that character, the pug. I forget her name right now.
Goals.
Yeah, thank you. I like that. I like the Lazy Susan small plate thing with his face on the menu. Someone pointed out to me, I didn't pick up on this, that
Yeah.
they keep talking about the Lazy Susan. He's like, yeah, but what about the face on the menu? Like, yeah, I could take it or leave it, because he has to put himself into every situation. It always has to be about him, which I thought was a clever little gag that didn't draw too much attention to itself. But the cheating
Absolutely.
thing, him constantly getting cuckolded by Pickles, that was funny for a little bit, but I felt like it just went on for too long. It didn't have that much mileage for the absurdism of that joke.
Basically splitting up, because she goes on a cross, world tour with God, whatever, Joey Pogo, I think is the character's name.
Yeah.
So they basically end up splitting up, but like it didn't explicitly say that either. So it was just kind of like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed implied they're definitely going to split up, but like, it just seemed to go nowhere and sputter out. But like, season one, with him being the face of depression, and the great scene where they do the crossover episode and he's crying from joy, and people seem like, well, that is the face of depression. They really went, I don't know, I thought they just dropped that, basically.
That was a joke that made me laugh quite a bit in the first part of the season.
And I don't know. I mean, ultimately, his final car ride with Bojack, I really liked. A lot of people want Peanut Butter to die. They want Bojack to improve, but Mr. Peanut Butter never took those steps for self-improvement, so he would end up killing himself. I never thought the show was that dark in that way.
Did Mr. Peanut Butter kill himself?
What?
I am not aware of this.
Yeah, a lot of fans on like Reddit or Facebook, particularly where I saw a lot of it, were speculating back in season 3, season 4, the show would end with Mr. Peanut Butter actually dying and not Bojack. And so when they set up Mr. Peanut Butter being the face of depression and his character Birthday Dad, which I love that joke where they adapt a Happy Birthday Dad card into a movie and then a TV series, is really funny.
For sure.
There's a car accident in it, and the trailer for season 6, it shows him getting hit by a car in one scene, so it seemed to really foreshadow him dying. I didn't want him to die, not just because I like the character, but because it just never felt appropriate. I mean, once again, Bojack isn't about nihilism, it's about denouncing nihilism. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. I just don't understand that fan desire. I don't really other than Bojack, arguably, and we'll get into that, I don't think killing off any character would have achieved anything, really.
Exactly. I want these characters to grow. I don't want them to die on the vine, and I get the irony of it. I do see that. I do see how it's almost set up with his family going to the farm, which led to more speculation. But like, there's always this want for a huge death in the show, and honestly, there's nothing I was less interested in than killing off a main character, including Bojack.
I mean, the irony is like too obvious, though. I mean, that would have felt just really stupid. I would have been upset by it, but I also wouldn't, a good movie or TV death should make me feel like, oh yeah, this makes me sad, but it really sends a message with the character's death. And, that's the only reason I ever kill off characters in what I write too. Like, there's got to be good story reason. And if there's not, then why do it? I just don't get it.
Exactly. So for me, with Peanut Butter picking Bojack up from the prison and, talking to him and making his lame jokes, and then he stops at, to get the Holly Woo symbol, and it does a press conference, and it shows that basically, it's Bojack's hell where his only friend is Mr. Peanut Butter, and he's just as self-concerned as he always was.
Yeah, so I guess we've covered Mr. Peanut Butter, Diane at this point, so I guess that just leaves Bojack.
Yeah, I mean, we got Karen, we talked about Todd's plot. Once again, I remember watching the scene where he reconnects with his mother, and I'll just make it a quick aside before the Bojack stuff, because that's what the season does, essentially. He reconnects with the mother, and I remember thinking, like, I should be crying at this point in the series, but honestly, I don't give a shit about what I'm watching right now.
I don't feel like they built up frustration with his mother, and I don't think that was built up throughout the show well, really, ever.
It was strange. That's all I can say. It was just strange and wasted.
They ended it on a joke, like we said. Like, I don't know. I didn't feel anything either. I agree with you there.
Yeah, Bojack. So him teaching at this school, I really liked. I liked that episode with him trying to connect with Hollyhock.
Yeah, no, I agree. They did some really good things there, because you really see Bojack continuing to try to be a good person, and it was really discouraging, wanting to see these characters grow when Bojack, had to go on that interview and basically, I don't know, like the first interview went well because it wasn't much of anything, and he basically apologized, but then he like defended himself, and it was just awkward, and I got that promised ownership to his mistakes that, the cliffhanger kind of alluded to, I guess.
Yeah. One thing I want to bring up real quick before getting back into the interview stuff. The episode where he spills the beans to all the main characters of the show, and they're in the room with the whiteboard with the ideas and all his mistakes and what the people are, the investigators are looking into, was a really great moment. I really love when they want him to come out to the party, and it's all the characters in the room, and then Bojack goes out and gives a speech and some stupid joke, and you see him like in the room, so he's outside, he's framed like John Wayne in The Searchers, and it's at that moment where like he's basically doomed, and the characters realize this as well. Princess Karen and Diane are looking at each other like, we're not saving this guy.
Yeah, no, that's a really good scene where they bring everybody together and just chronicle all of his mistakes. Like, oh, what could it be?
Yeah, and Todd's got all his Todd-centric things. He keeps adding things to the list in the background.
Yeah. No, that's definitely very humor to negate how heavy that feels. And then I just, sometimes I feel like this season is 16 episodes to its detriment, and I only feel that way in part 2. I feel like maybe they spend a little too long getting to the point where they stick Bojack on TV to own up to his mistakes. I mean, while I like the humor with the reporters and stuff,
it's tough and it's frustrating.
It's frustrating, and it also didn't feel urgent. Like the cliffhanger made it feel urgent. 9 made it feel urgent with the whiteboard, and then it's like, I don't know. I would probably have to rewatch it again though too.
Yeah, like that moment where Diane picks up the phone as the reporters, you're like scared, you're tense, you're in there, but then like, and I get this because at the end of the day, Bojack is a comedy. So when he goes on the interview and it goes incredibly well for him the first time, and then he goes back and fucks up and gets set up, it's really good writing. It is proper set, and it stays true to the whole show from the very first few episodes. But at that point in the show, I hate to say it, I was so much watching it for resolution that once again, I wonder if I rewatch the show just to soak it in and appreciate it creatively. I think I would be much more open to that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely split some fans. Like, again, and 2 both got very high critical acclaim. So it's like we're kind of nitpicking the show too, because overall I really like it in this final season. But any other thoughts before we get into the last 2 episodes?
Not really. I'll read what you say. I mean, I really enjoyed the last season as a whole. My only issue is the 2 preceding it, part B that is, were basically my 2 favorites of the show. So like when you go from like for me like 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10 to like 8.5 out of 10, it's not that I didn't enjoy it a lot. It's just that it didn't peak for me. It didn't ride that momentum. And it doesn't have to. I love Return of the Jedi. It's not Empire Strikes Back, but I still love Return of the Jedi.
I know what you mean. It's like, like 1/3 of Return of the Jedi is a sequel to Empire, then there's a bunch of weird shit happening.
Exactly.
But then I guess the to continue that metaphor, the Luke versus Vader of the end of Bojack Horseman are the last couple episodes, and man, the second to last episode just fucks with you so hard.
Are you referring to the one with he has the meeting about getting digitally erased from horsing around?
No, that's the third to last episode where he talks to right.
Okay, yeah. I was confusing second to last as being like, like at the last, penultimate, then second to last. But I just want to say real quick, that reveal, with the whole thing, his whole life tragedy was just like needless, is one of the biggest gut punches of the entire show.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like, Bojack would have stood up to the executives, like Herb would have stayed on. He wouldn't have been in the as bad a spot he was. He could have just stopped all the bad shit from happening on horsing around, essentially, but he just didn't.
And I always loved the character of Herb. I always loved the flashbacks with him. I love in the season when it shows the comedy club where he goes back his last night before he basically gets exposed and stands outside his silhouette that Herb paints, where he says, "This is your last night as a man before you're famous." I really love all that stuff, and in this season they do a lot that I really enjoyed seeing that stuff come back, because they stopped doing that so much in seasons 3 and 4 with that character, and I get why.
Yeah.
But to round it out, it was nice seeing them.
Saved it for the final season, and learning about how studio executives kind of fucked up all of these characters' lives, and you didn't even know it. That makes me want to rewatch some of the earlier seasons and recontextualize things as well.
True. I mean, I'll definitely have to rewatch the show as a whole at some point in time.
To share it with my partner and just kind of see what he has to say and think about it.
So we'll start with I don't remember. Is it called The View from Halfway Down? Is that the next to last episode? Its title?
Yes, that is correct. The whole near-death dream sequence kind of episode.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the show has two endings basically, and this is the first of the two, of course. And it really does what a lot of fans, the kind of doomers of the show, wanted to see.
And obviously, the final episode is the resolution. But you watch The View from Halfway Down, and you're like, "Oh my God, it could have ended there."
Yeah, totally. You could end it on that final little bit at the end when the show flatlines, and then goes to credits silent, and you could end the series there if you wanted to, definitely.
Yeah, but like you said, and some people might disagree, but we both agree, the show is about denouncing nihilism and not being nihilistic. And I feel like if your title character would have just died in that moment, that wouldn't have been what the show is about, because the show has always been about triumphing over your horrible lows and your mistakes and all of these things. And Bojack always has glimpses of that. One of my favorite times that happens is like when he's learning how to run, and this like monkey character comes out of nowhere and he's like, "Hey, it's doable, but you got to do it every day."
Yeah,
we see very much firsthand that Bojack is not working hard at it every day, and that's why he ends up breaking up. He ends up breaking into his old house, and he ends up getting drunk and overdosed and falling in the pool.
Yeah, and that character, real quick, is one of my favorite that guy actors. He's in the George Romero movie Monkey Shines. He's in Californication in a pretty significant role, and he's in Veronica Mars for like 2 episodes. So I love that character, that monkey, in season 1 is running. He's jogging with his wife, but in season 2 he jogs alone, implying she passed away, and he's speaking from experience there, which I really appreciate for such a minor character. They give that much detail to him.
Absolutely. But yeah, the trippiness of like my throat was like tight the whole time watching it, because you just feel like, oh, is Bojack dead already? I mean, is he in a coma because he overdosed, or like what the fuck happened? Here, like, he's had this dream before, So you just kind of get this like, oh, this is like his negative life flashing before his eyes kind of deal.
And there's a lot of really clever, just surrealistic little cues in there for you as the audience. Like, he has a glass of water and it's chlorine, and the view of him out on the balcony, he sees himself in the pool at an angle I believe is pretty much impossible and strange how they frame it. His father also being the Secretariat horse.
Which I felt like was an amazing touch, so they could actually have a conversation with his father, because it wouldn't have really happened otherwise.
Yeah, that's very true. I didn't think about that. It's really basically a horror movie for an episode. I mean, the whole way through, I mean, it's basically just a horror movie.
I totally hear that, and they just, a lot of the characters who have passed just straight up talk to each other like, in the war, did that make my life have more value? Or Herb talks about doing philanthropy and how it's the greatest thing he ever did, and but does that really make you a good person? And all these characters are like having deep dive jabs at each other, things that they did that were right and wrong, and it just like it feels nihilistic in these moments, because it's like, damn, these characters were valuable, sure, but they also did a lot of good things, and they're just kind of getting dunked on by each other in this like limbo world.
Yeah, what it reminded me a lot of this episode actually is just a strange comparison. A film by Richard Linklater. He did he's known for like School of Rock and Boyhood, but he also did the Before trilogy, which were filmed I think 7 years apart each one, and it just shows this couple, and it's largely based around conversation, usually existential, or just kind of musing about life at various points in life. And he has some surreal ones about like interacting with dreams and stuff. He had a Scanner Darkly, and another one, I forget the title, but it was also a rotoscoped animated picture. And the conversations in this episode really took me back to some of Richard Linklater's films, like Before Midnight.
Those are the romance films with Ethan Hawke, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never seen those. I really got to, though.
Oh, yeah, they're great. I'd really recommend, especially like if you like something like Bojack. It's actually kind of similar in terms of at least being like kind of comedic and accessible, but also touching on some emotional nerves.
Yeah, no, I think I definitely dig that a lot. But yeah, so do you think he was going to die just in the moment watching that episode and seeing the end of it and seeing him call Diane and not getting through, or she can't do anything essentially? What was your gut feeling of what was going to happen?
I had heard a lot of people say it was ambiguous actually, whether or not he lived or died. I saw on my Facebook timeline people debating. And I tried not to see too much, so I was actually looking more for clues as to whether or not the final episode, because I knew there's one more episode coming, I knew it wasn't going to just be a funeral. So I was like, is that going to be a death dream within a death dream? I was looking for anything to cue in that he might have actually died, and it was all fantasy at the end. His mind pieces together to give himself solace or resolution. And ultimately, I don't feel that way. I think the ending was just people reading too much into it, like Taxi Driver. People say Travis Bickle died, and the screenwriter, the director, Martin Scorsese, even Robert De Niro, all did not intend that. People just read too much into it. And I think Bojack's very similar. When he flatlined at the end, and then segueing into the next episode, when it picks back up and it's got a song, Why the Long Face, and it's paralleling his character's death and horsing around with Bojack living, I really did get the feeling that it might not, for that moment, for that montage, I thought it is very Bojack comedy, subversion of expectations, but it was also like so tie it up with a neat ribbon on top that I thought maybe this isn't quite real.
Yeah, no, I totally feel you. I guess I just was optimistic, and I didn't think he was dying. I thought we'd absolutely have that near-death experience, but I just kind of felt like the show wouldn't go that dark at the very end. I don't think the last episode could have said as much as it ended up saying if he would have just died.
Definitely not. And the last episode, it's a tough one. It's a very good last episode. It does one of my cardinal rules for writing with a TV show, in a comedy show particularly. Never throw your protagonist in prison for things he did throughout the course of the show. I think after Seinfeld, it's just cursed. Just don't do it. It's just not a good writing rule. So it was kind of funny to see Bojack do that.
At least they didn't keep him there, at least.
Yeah, and also the way they do is perfectly fine. I don't love it. I don't love that's where it goes. But it makes sense for the character. It makes sense for the season, the plotline they're building, the themes. I like that he's performing Hedda Gabler, which is known to be the role in theater for women, considering a really interesting take on power dynamics and relationships in the season. I really thought was compelling.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's almost like prison was just like another rehab to him. It was kind of a joke, kind of something he took seriously, and then once we get out of there, an individualized ending with each of the other characters, and each of those individualized endings with the other four characters, I thought, were basically perfect interactions with said characters.
Yeah, I mostly agree. The only one that I was a little off on was Todd. I don't know why, but
yeah,
I just felt like him and Todd never had that reconnection. But maybe him going to jail made Todd reconsider. Maybe Todd forgiving his mother establishes that a little more, that if I rewatch it, not binging it half asleep because I'm exhausted after work and just need to finish the show, I'll pick up on a little bit.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree. That's something that season one had, that was probably lost throughout the course of the show because there's so much more going on. But yeah, the relationship never really felt like it was there in the later seasons because I just don't think there was room. I had a nice moment. It wasn't my favorite, it was probably my least favorite of the four interactions. But I guess Todd is probably my least favorite of the five main characters. I mean, he can be funny. I love Aaron Paul and his dumbass voice. Like, it's good casting. It's a good character. To kind of send Todd off, I wish I would have seen focus on the asexuality part so much in the middle of the show. I guess now that he actually ended up with someone who fit him well, I wish they would have focused more on him and his relationship with Maud, the new bunny rabbit character, instead of the mother stuff. I felt like, I would have felt more of something there.
Yeah, I agree, and I like Maud. For a character who added to the show later on, I thought she wasn't much, but I liked her presence. I thought she was a good fit for Todd.
Yeah, she was cute, and I like the subtle touch that, connective tissue, the final connective tissue, if Bojack and Todd go their separate ways, is that like, oh yeah, Bojack technically met Maud first, just in passing.
Yeah, it's I do really love the joke where he has a business with babies and he mentions casually he was listening to Pokey Pokey with his associates.
You have a nice moment, and then Mr. Peanut Butter, like you said, it's Bojack's hell, but even Bojack had entertained Mr. Peanut Butter's notion of like reenacting Horsing Around as a guest episode earlier on. So I feel like even Bojack is kind of just let go of that animosity at this point too.
Yeah, I think he's just resigned to it.
Yeah, I agree.
So you want to go chronological, go Carolyn, and then we'll end on his final interaction with Diane.
Exactly. Yeah, I thought the dance with Princess Carolyn was great. I thought it was funny that she ended up with Judah. I didn't really expect that, but, if two characters have always had each other's backs, I guess it's been the two of them, in this kind of funny, dry humor sort of way.
I really like that. I liked his band. I like Judah. I love the joke in season 3 about she mentions him not getting humor, and he says he makes a reference before he leaves her room. He says, "Oh, and by the way, we have the lawyers coming in to install those light bulbs tomorrow." Wait. And I like how his look with his hair down. And honestly, I love the whole thing is her trying to choose between business and being a mother and what she wants. with those two lives, and with Judah, she ultimately finds, even more so than, I forget his name, even more so than with Ralph, she doesn't have to choose. She gets the best of both worlds, which I think is exactly what Princess Carolyn deserves.
See it coming, but I definitely thought it was a nice way to bring all the characters together again, and Bojack basically has made amends with Princess Carolyn, which I think is really important because of all the people that's been, in his life. I feel like that's the person you need to make amends with, who's basically always done right by you. And even before the timeline of the show starts in season 1, she's been putting up with his shit for like God knows how many years. So I like that the terms that they left on.
Yeah, it was definitely his most important relationship, even though it's not the most focused on one with the show.
Yeah, I totally agree. Which brings us to the last few intimate moments with Diane, which a really, teen coming of age movie kind of vibe from watching that final scene.
I agree, especially the music they play at the very end. It felt very like Wes Anderson or like Garden State or something.
And it's really kind of impressive how their interactions being like heartfelt and awkward at the same time.
That's a very astute point that I picked up on emotionally, but I didn't quite see what they were doing in that dynamic, because it is very open but yet strained at the same time.
Because there's so much baggage there, and like final action before the scene was calling her, and she thinks he's dead for a good while, and like, no, that's nothing like that has ever really happened to me, and I can't imagine what that would do to a person if you cared about someone and they like tried to reach out to you in a desperate hour, and then like, oh, turns out everything's fine anyway. Like, that must fuck you up.
Yeah, exactly. And especially like, I don't know if you've had this, but being someone who in some relationships has been the needy one, it really gets you to reflect on how you treat people and how you're thinking about yourself in that moment, but you're not the only person in that moment or in that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, to a more broad sense, I think a lot of us, if not all of us, can, relate to that. Maybe not to that intensity, but yeah, I really think that it was right for them to, because it's basically implied that these two people won't ever see each other again. They have no reason to see each other again. They're, not really good for each other's lives anymore. The title, they still have a really good final conversation because they also feel like they owe that to each other.
Yeah, it's that was what I wanted to end the discussion on this with, was asking if you thought they would ever see each other interact again. And I mean, I don't think so.
I don't think Diane would want that. Maybe Bojack would, but I don't think Diane would want that anymore.
No, I don't even think she wanted to see him at this party, actually.
Maybe she realized it was cathartic in a way to confront him, but like beforehand, I mean, she was like hanging out on the roof. So, I mean, that's kind of a telltale sign that maybe she didn't want to see him.
Exactly. And the reveal where she's telling the story about her boyfriend, how it hurt the relationship, and then she's referring to him in the past tense, how he was her boyfriend, and he asks what happened, and she shows the wedding ring. I think it's a really great moment. It's a clever little reveal.
Oh, for sure. And that really cemented my opinion that, oh yeah, she does not want to ever see him again. Like, she's moved on finally from all this Hollywood craziness and the bullshit. And I think, that's an underrated element of Diane's. And not only does she find a better partner in a more stable relationship, and she finds self-worth in her work again, but she also moves away from Hollywood because it's an arguably very toxic environment that didn't really do any of these characters any favors in the end. Maybe it did Princess Carolyn because she's tough and she could handle it, but all these other characters, that setting just fucked them up, and I'm glad she got away from that too.
Yeah, and like you said, with the producers manipulating the plot of the show behind the scenes and affecting characters' emotional arcs, with the reveal with horsing around the whole show really is about how Hollywood and fame just destroys people and how they can't cope with the trauma of being something that most of us strive to be. Not most of us strive to be, but most of us, fantasize of in some capacity.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I feel like we've all done it to some level or another.
One thing, I forgot to mention this earlier, which sucks. Diane's final interaction with Mr. Peanut Butter, I think, is one of the best moments of the show.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I was thinking about that too, but got on another point. I love their conversation and just too, and they're just like, you know what? You're a product of all the people that you've ever had a relationship with, a friendship or family or any really significant interaction. And I feel like that conversation can be later applied to Bojack and Diane, even if it is a more strained, intense relationship at this point.
Yeah, and ultimately and conclusively, with especially season 6 being this, what I really appreciate about that half of the season, even though I wasn't as positive as I was about the first half, is that it really made me reevaluate how I treat people, the role that I play in my relationships. And ultimately, with Bojack, with his relationship with women particularly, where he's like, I didn't have control over her, I didn't have power over her, I didn't have power over myself, but yet he still had power over. And when Diane has that final talk with him and talks about the trauma that he gave her by calling her when he was jumping into the pool and basically, accidentally, if not intentionally, committing suicide. And she says how that he no longer had power over her after a certain amount of time is when Bojack finally understands. I think it definitely left a pretty big impression on me about how I interact with other people and being more conscientious of their feelings in situations.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like, this show, like you said earlier, does try to make a lot of political takes and a lot of social commentaries, but I feel like they save the most poignant commentary for last. And they were talking about in the interview about his power over women, and you think it's going one way where it's like, oh, we're talking about like domination, control, sexual inclinations, but then they really open up the definition of power and add it with Diane, like the emotions that you have over people, the things that you don't do on purpose, those create a powerful influence over other people, and they screw people up emotionally. And that perhaps is the most tragic part of Bojack Horseman as a show, is that happens a lot. They really pointed that out in a really good way. So I thought that was probably the best commentary the show had to offer in its whole runtime.
I agree, because there's other ones that were done well. I mean, there's definitely some political episodes I really enjoy. There's some that I agree with. Some that I, like I said earlier, I may not agree with every bit of it, but the way they present it, I really see their side. But particularly that last season, 6B, how they do the power dynamics between men and women, or older men and younger women, fame, all that stuff, sober people and drunk people, how they present all that with Bojack's character and how he interacts with other people, and how they show it I've never seen before and I've never considered in the same way. It was really the first one that was eye-opening for me.
Yeah, no, I totally know what you mean. Like, they didn't pull any punches with that message in the last season. I appreciate it. And then, I guess I appreciate is just how they shared a comfortable bit of silence, or really uncomfortable, depending on how you look at it, and just looking up into the stars and just kind of like, wondering at your tiny speck in the universe kind of feeling that the show, but it still remained hopeful somehow.
Yeah, and ultimately, what really sucks is honestly, do I want a 7th full season of the show? And I don't mean like if this season didn't resolve it, of course. Would I want another 3 years of Bojack? Honestly, no. Not that I don't enjoy it. I'm going to miss it. I already miss looking forward to the new seasons, or talking about what may happen, and just that excitement of following a show in real time. But I think the show really if it didn't end this year, it would need to end next year. I mean, not for quality reasons, because it said and did everything it really could have done with the concept.
And yeah, they were putting the characters through a lot of shit. And when you have a comedy that is this heavy, I feel like it would have got disingenuous if they would have kept putting characters through crap and then having them not learn from their mistakes. I think maybe the show obviously gotten to that point if they would have, I guess. But also from a comedy standpoint, I mean, who knows? The quality could have dipped. And a lot of sitcoms do tend to dip once you get into the 7th, 8th, and 9th seasons. So I feel like overall, it felt right to end after a 6th season.
I definitely agree. And, it sucks because it definitely does feel like a part of life's missing now in a funny way. Because I don't watch many shows as they air, so this is one of my only experiences with that, really. But I'm also grateful that I'm grateful to end on such a good note, in that I enjoyed it thoroughly as much as I did. Even though the show does have peaks and valleys for me throughout its entire 6.5 season run, there were still dips in quality, and then it'll get right back up and all that. But to round it out in a way that I thought was very positive, I really am happy about.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But yeah, it sounds like for both of us, Bojack Horseman is one of our favorite just animated shows, comedies. You call it a drama sometimes. It certainly did a lot, and it had a profound impact on me. I think watching it in your young adult years is a really great time to watch it too. It's a lot of times it felt like a small guide to live your life, and maybe a list of things not to do, a list of things to do sometimes, while also being really funny to make it, not be preachy.
Yeah, and one thing it affected me on, just in not in terms of like how I interact with people and all that, which I already mentioned, is that every time I look at like some of my books I've written since I started watching the show, every now and then I just see a little like peek at something like, I kind of took that page out of Bojack. I kind of see how this, how even they was framed as a straight comedy at first, but it develops into basically a thriller, a horror story by the second book. The ending of the second book, the character mentions actually like seeing the people in front of him, kind of in reference, not intentionally, to Bojack in the Free Churro episode, saying, with his mother, her last words to him was, "I see you." And I think about it all the time, just these little things that I didn't intend, but Bojack influenced and just, it just bled into my psyche with.
Yeah. If you watch this whole show, I feel like it's kind of hard for it to not bleed into your psyche, because I don't think there's a whole lot of shows airing right now that really to do what this show has done over the past few years.
No, I can't think of it, at least not in the same way,
No. Kind of compare Rick and Morty, but I think Rick and Morty is trying to balance drama and comedy in a very different way, and I would say less effective way as well.
Yeah, I'm not really into Rick and Morty. The aesthetics just put me off. It's just not my thing. I'm just not the target audience. But I always see them lumped together, and regardless of my personal preference, I just think it's an unfair comparison, because how I see it is they're both modern animated comedies that are kind of edgy, but then have emotionally sober moments. I don't think that's exactly like a one-for-one comparison, to be quite honest.
No. And I've watched, all of Rick and Morty other than the new season, and I've watched all of BoJack, and I can say that they are very different shows. They have some surface level similarities, but I think they're personally very different.
Yeah, I think maybe crossover and audience appeal maybe is my only guess, but even then it's a stretch.
I think a lot of people might watch both shows because, people like different things, and they are similar, but I don't think they are a one-to-one comparison, like you said.
Yeah, so ultimately, with this, and if you're comfortable wrapping it up at this point, I don't
Absolutely.
really
Well, we talked about BoJack Horseman for 2 hours, so we probably should. If people are still listening, thank you for sticking around and listening to a hopefully insightful, at least nostalgic look at BoJack Horseman.
Yeah. Thank you for listening, and I'm Todd Crawford.
Cool for the comic shop.